never played Scythe before. So what better thing to do than go play the sequel? Maybe that's not a fair thing to do, but I am a glutton for the hotness. Expeditions has been sitting on the hotness. So it's a perfect opportunity for me to jump into the Scythe ecosphere and see if it's something for me. I haven't got into Scythe before, really probably because of the theming, not because it's not intriguing to me. It's just my gaming partner, my wife. She tends to bounce off things pretty hard that have to do with, I don't know, steampunk. I don't know what this is. What is this? I guess that's kind of the point of this video. What is this thing? We played this game, got into it a couple different times. I have some initial impressions on it, but I also have way more questions than I have critiques on this game. In fact, 15 of them that I'm going to go through. But before we do that, I have to give you some context to those questions. So we're going to do a brief overview of what this game is doing and what it brings to your table. So what do you do in this game? You're choosing a combination of 3 different actions with a 4th sort of auxiliary action. And there is a kind of quirky mechanism to choosing those actions. You see, you start with this cube and then refresh, and then you move it over, and that cube allows you to do all 3 actions, and then you move it up to the top 3 actions, covering one of those actions. The one you cover is the one you don't do, and you keep kind of shifting that cube around until you need to refresh your hand, which we'll get to in just a second. But let's first go over these actions. First and foremost is move. All but one mech, I believe, has a base movement of 3. So you basically move 1 to 3 spaces if performing that action. In movement, one thing to note, there is a core group of initial hexes that are uncovered. The rest of the hexes are flipped over. They also have map tokens. If your mech moves onto one of those positions, it immediately stops its movement. You flip the hex and you collect that map token. Map tokens are used for some in-game points, essentially, which we'll get into in a second. The other action is play, and that is the core mechanism where you play cards. You see on the left side of your board, you have your hand of cards. They're never in your hand, which I guess is a 16th question. Why do you call it a hand of cards, but it's a tableau of cards off to the left-hand side? Why aren't they just in my hand? I don't know. One of many questions that this game brought up for me. And you see, in your hand, when you play a card, you move it to the right hand side. They stay in a row. They have to be in a row in the order in which you've played, because some cards refer to previously played cards. You get the point. There are 3 types of cards. There's item cards, meteorite cards, and quest cards. All of these cards initially do the same thing. They all have a core value. When you play it, you get that resource. There's 2 different resources that are tracked on your board, both guile and power. Those are spent to do other stuff later in the game, which we'll get to. The other things that these cards all have in common are worker spots with special abilities. So you can play the card to the right hand side and not activate it, and you just get that core value of the card. Or if you have the right meeple in the right color, you can also play that at the same time to take advantage of that special ability. Now, each of these cards also have a separate function, essentially. They're all used in a in-game scoring mechanism called glory. You gain glory when you do a thing a certain amount of times. It's a little confusing, I know. It's honestly a kind of a hard game to explain with logic. First off, you have item cards. Those are the most straightforward. If you activate an upgrade action, you get to slide that card into the side of your board, and no longer do you have to place a meeple or a worker on that card to activate that item. It's now essentially locked in there for you. Then you have meteorites. You meld meteorites, which is doing a similar thing to those item cards. You tuck them under your board, you turn them to the side. There's a little bonus that happens every time you tuck one of these meteorite cards. The cool thing about them is when you tuck them, it activates all previous meteorite cards. And then you have quests. Quests are completed when you are on the matching number space. You see each one of these cards has a number on it. What are they called? Each hex also has a number on it. So when you're on one of these hexes with a matching number and you play a card that gives you the solve ability or action, you can then solve it. And when you do so, you have to pay a variable number of resources listed on the right side of the card. and you get a bonus when you do that. These are tucked in the top of your board. Like with items and meteorites, as you're tucking these cards, when you get a certain number of them, you can boast or brag about them, which is a totally separate action in the game. And then you can place one of your 4 glory stars on one of those spaces on the base camp board. Whew. That's sort of a lot. Then there's the gather action. That gather action is essentially an activation of the hex that you're on. There's symbols on the hexes that allow you to do different things like gain one of the blue or yellow or purple or red or green meeples that you'll need to activate those certain cards. It's also the core way in which you gain more cards by either taking a card that's in a face-up display in the middle of the board, which is essentially acts as a market. They're not spaces that you go onto, or grabbing a card from the deck. There's also mechanisms to sweep the entire market out on this board. What else? There is ways to collect more power or guile here. There's a variety of functions that sit out here. Lastly is refresh. When you've played enough of these cards to the right-hand side, you're inevitably wanting to get those back to the left-hand side into your hand so you can use them again. So you basically have to skip a turn, place your square in the refresh, take all of the cards and the meeples up from that right side, put the cards on the left side, meeples back on your board, and you're completely refreshed to kind of rinse and repeat on the card engine that you just built. The goal of this game is to place 4 glory stars. You start the game with these 4 wooden glory stars, and you need to essentially claim goals with them. They have things like completing 4 quests, melding 4 meteorite cards, upgrading 4 item cards, having 5 of the map tokens that we already talked about. As you explore, you get to pick up, or having 7 meeples workers that you've accumulated, having 8 cards that haven't been tucked in your board yet. And the last things are corruption. You can also score for having a certain number of these corruption tokens that are placed on newly flipped hexes. See, every time you flip one of these hexes, you place a number of tokens on there that sum up to at least the number that's listed on the hex. And then using a vanquish action card, you can spend a certain number of power or guile to eradicate that corruption from the hex, and you get to collect those. They're worth 2 points at the end of the game. They're also, if you accumulate 7 of them, you get to place one of your glory stars. These glory stars are scored at the end of the game based upon the number of quests that you've completed. The more quests you complete, the more they're worth. You also score based upon coins that are awarded throughout the game through various actions on these cards. You also score points for all of the items that you've upgraded. On the bottom right corner, there is a point, or I guess it's dollar. I keep saying points, but it's coin or money value. I don't even know what it's called, because everything's essentially converted to money, but it's really just points. Once again, kind of another question that I didn't list. And then the aforementioned corruption tokens, 2 points per. And basically you convert all of that stuff into money, and the richest person wins. Let's talk a little bit about all of the questions that popped up to me, and not many of them have to do with the actual mechanical design of this game. So the core reason you're exploring is this doctor has disappeared, and I don't know why when I essentially find the tile or his lair and I flip it and we vanquish it, the game isn't over. So technically that's not the point of the game. Ultimately, the point of the game is to gain glory through your expeditions to the north. So that was kind of a main question, is the main motivation for this game existing, or for the player to be here, is to kind of investigate what the heck happened to Dr. Tarkovsky. But it didn't really feel like that's what I was doing in this game. Number 2, why is corruption all over these unexplored tiles? What is corruption? I don't even understand it as a mechanism. How am I actually uncorrupting things? And why does it take power and guile to vanquish corruption? And actually, now that I think about it, what is guile? Let me look that up. Sly, cunning, intelligence. So power and guile / intelligence kind of seems like a character attribute for me. Why is it a resource? And why is it a resource to be spent on corruption? So my number 6 is, the quests make sense, but why can I use them as a card before I've completed them? And then when I look at some of these quests, like, how am I going to cure this whale of parasites? That seems incredibly difficult. And why am I just weakening this Leviathan? This seems like kind of a big deal. Is somebody else going to come in behind and finish this Leviathan off? It kind of seems like a bigger deal than finding this Dr. Tarkovsky. And then closing a vortex, like that seems pretty existential. I've seen Stranger Things, and I know the Upside Down is a incredibly dangerous space. I might want to really focus in on that. Why am I collecting meteorites? What the heck does melding have to do with anything? Actually, what is melding? Let's look that up. To declare or announce a card or combination of cards for score in a card game. Oh, so it's a literal definition. It's not even a thematic thing. Just melding a card is just declaring it. But what does that have to do with anything? Why do these meteorites give me any sort of power? Thematically, why do you meld them? I don't know. Why does it take another worker to use an item before it's upgraded? I just don't understand. Why on earth am I boasting about collecting meteorites, items, completing quests, vanquishing corruption, collecting cards, gaining map tokens or workers? Does anyone in this world care? I mean, you've got people in fields watching these giant mechs destroy their crops as they walk through them. I think they have some bigger things to think about than hearing you boast about these accomplishments. Speaking of, why haven't we created a farming mech? You have these people sitting in the middle of a field still whacking away at corn. You'd think they would have invented a combine or something at this point. So a lot of that I say in jest, but I think all of this adds up to, I don't know what the hell I'm doing in this game. I feel like it's thematically disjointed. And certainly if you're a newbie like myself to Scythe, in this Scythe world, you could come in here and be completely lost on what any of this stuff is doing. And now this might be my problem. This might be that I'm either just not making the mental connections on this stuff, or I haven't played enough in this universe to understand what the heck all of this is doing. I actually had this epiphany as I was trying to teach this game, and it was really hard to teach it through like thematic association, because it was hard for me to communicate why you're picking up a meteorite or melding it, or why you're doing this quest, why you need to uncover these boast token spaces to actually lock in the goals that you're trying to boast about. It just didn't really flow. The teach was sort of hard when you try to use thematic elements to help kind of bring a player into the world and understand why they're doing what they're doing. It was really me just kind of describing mechanics and hoping the player kind of understood mechanically what was going on, and they didn't need to kind of have this intuitive association to events or theme that's happening throughout the game. And none of this critique, mind you, is on mechanics, because I think it does a lot of great stuff. I mean, Jamie is melding a ton. Did I say melding? Jamie is combining a ton of really cool mechanics that I love. You have stuff like multi-use cards, worker placement, two types of worker placement. Technically, you have the workers that you're actually placing on the cards, and your mech is sort of this worker placement mechanism as you travel around the map, and then gather on the hex to kind of perform the action that's associated there. And then there's like this feel-good progression of power as you get more of these cards and you build this engine and you're moving them from the left to the right, and then maybe you get cards that allow you to rescue one of them and then reuse them again. I mean, I think there's a lot of really great feel-good moments in this game. I just go back to, I don't know why I'm doing any of it at the end of the day. There's a lot of really great games, and I just don't see myself getting this to the table consistently if I don't get it. And if I can't bring somebody else into this world and kind of tell that story and get them excited about this game thematically, it's going to be tough for me to ever get this to the table. If I definitely can see, if you are, which there are tons of rabid fans in Scythe, and maybe I need to go back and play that game. That is a huge hole in my repertoire here, and a huge hole in what I'm saying. So really, this is, once again, just the perspective of a noob to the Scythe world. I could definitely see somebody loving this game if they are totally enthralled with this world, because it's doing a lot of really great things. There's really fun cards. There's just a lot of really cool mechanics going on here. But for me, I think we're gonna probably bounce off this one. I'm gonna try to get it to the table a few more times. I'm definitely interested in exploring the mechanics, the cards, the combinations, the engines you can build. I think there's stuff to explore there, but I don't see myself being able to sell it often enough to my game group to get it played, if that makes sense. And you tell me, am I totally off base here? Do I need to go and play Scythe? I'm absolutely open to listen. This is not something where I'm completely like hardline on this take. I think there's more to explore here. And I think there's, you know, I might have a lot of misunderstandings thematically of like what's going on in this world. You know, let me know in the comments. But from this noob's perspective, I'm not giving it my stamp of approval today. And that's that. If you've made it this far and I've added any value for you whatsoever, maybe think about liking and subscribing. Outside of that, thank you very much for being here and have a great day. I'm out of here.